But what if I told you that Saladin, the greatest hero of Islam, the symbol of chivalry and mercy, was actually a traitor? What if everything he achieved he built upon the ruins of the legacy of the man who had been like a father to him? The year is 1174. The teacher is dead. Nur ad-Din Zangi, the man who plucked Saladin from obscurity and granted him Egypt, is dying. His empire is in chaos, and his heir is just 11 years old. And Saladin, his most trusted disciple, faces a choice that would make your blood run cold. He can remain loyal to the man and watch as everything collapses, or he can follow a dream and become a usurper. History remains silent about this. Today you will find out how Saladin, hiding behind oaths of loyalty to an 11-year-old boy, stripped him of his cities step by step. What bloody provocation was committed by a single knight, giving Saladin the pretext for the total war he so desperately craved? We will deconstruct the ingenious trap at Hattin, how he lured the Frankish army into a fiery cauldron and turned the desert into a mass grave. The capture of Jerusalem, why his legendary mercy was not just an act of faith, but the coldest political calculation of his life. And the Battle of Titans, what really happened when the only king who was his equal, Richard the Lionheart, met him face to face. This is not the story of a saint. This is the story of a brilliant politician who understood. To fulfill a great dream, sometimes you must commit a great betrayal. He was hailed as a hero by some and a ruthless invader by others. The news of Nur ad-Din's death shakes Cairo like an earthquake. Saladin, his 36-year-old viceroy, publicly tears at his clothes and declares a period of mourning for his master and teacher. And then, once left alone, he begins to act. He sees Nur ad-Din's empire falling apart. In Aleppo, the 11-year-old heir, as-Saleh, becomes a pawn in the hands of the eunuch Gumushketin. Damascus is ruled by one emir, Mosul by another. The Crusaders are rubbing their hands together, watching as their greatest enemy devours itself. How does Saladin respond? He makes a brilliant move, one he learned from Nur ad-Din himself. He does not declare himself Sultan, nor does he unleash a war. He writes a humble letter to Damascus, swearing eternal loyalty to the 11-year-old as-Saleh. He mints coins bearing the boy's name. He proclaims himself merely a faithful servant, the sword of the late Nur ad-Din. And then, having gathered an army, he announces that he is marching into Syria to protect his young master from wicked advisors who have usurped power. This was propaganda in its purest form. It was a true gambit. In November 1174, he approaches Damascus, and the city, remembering the justice of Nur ad-Din and seeing Saladin as his direct successor, opens its gates to him without a fight. But in Aleppo, where the boy heir himself resided, they call him a traitor. The protector, they cry, has come to steal the crown. And here begins Saladin's tragedy. To unite Islam, he is forced to wage war against Muslims. He would spend the next 12 years not in battles against the Franks. He would dedicate them to an exhausting, dirty civil war against the family of his teacher. He would have to besiege Aleppo twice. Assassins sent by his Muslim enemies would try to kill him twice. He would be forced, step by step, city by city, to take by force what Nur ad-Din had once united. He had hoped to remain a loyal student, but fate forced him to become a replacement. Only by 1186, having finally captured Mosul, would he complete the work. He would transform into what Nur ad-Din had only dreamed of being, the sole ruler of Egypt, Syria, and parts of Mesopotamia. The sword of Jihad had finally been forged into a single piece. So, 1186, Saladin is the absolute sovereign, having reached the summit. For 12 years he fought against his brothers in faith, and now he is ready to unleash all this might upon the kingdom of Jerusalem. But he cannot. A paradox has emerged. He has won, but his army is exhausted. His emirs are tired of war. They fought for unification, but a holy war against the Franks, that is something else entirely. Moreover, he has a truce with Jerusalem, and Saladin, the just king, cannot be the first to break it. He is trapped by his own reputation. He needs a reason, a cause belli. He needs an act from the Crusaders so egregious, so bloody and insulting that it will force even his weariest generals to draw their swords in fury. A villain is required, and history provides him with the perfect candidate. A knight from the castle of Kerak, a man hated even by his own king, an adventurer who broke every truce for the sake of gold. His name was Raynald of Châtillon, and he was the very man ready to commit the provocation that would enter history textbooks as the catalyst for the fall of Jerusalem.
Raynald of Châtillon. In the Arab world, his name became synonymous with the devil. This man was known as an adventurer who through marriage gained possession of Kerak, an impregnable fortress nest looming directly over the caravan route connecting Egypt and Syria. He was Saladin's personal enemy. Years earlier, he had done the unthinkable, launched ships into the Red Sea to plunder merchant vessels and, it was rumored, to attack Mecca itself. Saladin had sworn to destroy him. But in 1186, a fragile truce was in effect. Saladin, bound by his word, waited. Raynald, bound only by his greed, acted. In late 1186 or early 1187, a massive and incredibly wealthy caravan was passing by Kerak, traveling from Cairo to Damascus. It was moving under the protection of the treaty. Raynald of Châtillon didn't give a damn about the treaty. He led his knights out of the fortress and, breaking his king's oath, attacked the caravan. He seized untold riches and took hundreds of people captive. Saladin flew into a rage. This was not just a robbery, it was a personal insult and the perfect pretext for war. He immediately sent envoys to the king of Jerusalem, Guy of Lusignan. The demand was simple: release the captives, return the loot, punish the oathbreaker. King Guy was trapped. He was the king, but Raynald was one of those who had brought him to power. Guy of Lusignan found himself powerless. The Sultan sent envoys to Raynald, but he only laughed in their faces. According to chroniclers, he replied, "I am lord in my lands, just as he is in his, and I have no peace with Saladin." When the envoys returned to Saladin with this answer, the Sultan realized he was free. The truce was broken, and he wasn't the one who broke it. The jihad he had been preparing for 12 years was declared. And in that moment, sources report, Saladin made a personal vow. If Allah allowed him to take Raynald of Châtillon alive, he would kill him with his own hands. Spring 1187. The great machine of war is set in motion. From every corner of the empire, from Egypt, Syria, and Mosul, troops flock to Saladin. The largest army the Islamic world has fielded against the Franks since the beginning of the Crusades is assembling. In Jerusalem, panic. King Guy of Lusignan declares a general mobilization. He gathers every single knight, every mercenary, and even strips garrisons from cities and castles. the king brings the entire army of the kingdom onto the battlefield. Two of the greatest armies of the era are moving toward each other. But Saladin is in no hurry to attack. Being a strategist, he knows that the Crusader army, clad in armor, is strong in defense or in a head-on charge. His plan is not to defeat them in battle. His plan is to destroy them before the battle even begins. To do this, he needs to lure them out of their camp at Sepphoris, where they had water and shade, and force them to march through the desert, scorched by the July sun. Bait was required, something so valuable that King Guy could not ignore it. In July 1187, Saladin attacks the city of Tiberias. Inside the city's citadel, the wife of Raymond III, one of the kingdom's chief barons, is trapped. The trap has snapped shut. King Guy faces a choice: stay in safety by the water, or go to save Tiberias and walk into the hell that Saladin has prepared for him.
A schism tore through King Guy of Lusignan's war council. Raymond of Tripoli, whose wife was in besieged Tiberias, begged them not to move. He said, "I am ready to lose my wife and my city, but not the kingdom. We stand by water. Saladin is in the desert. Let him come to us." This was the voice of reason. However, a different voice spoke up. The voice of the master of the Templars, Gerard de Ridefort, and the voice of that same Raynald of Châtillon. They called Raymond a coward. They shouted that refusing to come to the rescue was a disgrace. And King Guy, a weak ruler who feared looking like a coward more than he feared making a mistake, made the fatal decision. The order was given for the army to march. On July 3rd, 1187, the entire army of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, 20,000 men, including 1,200 heavy knights, left the springs of Sepphoris and began a 20-kilometer march through the scorched Palestinian desert. This did not resemble a march so much as a suicide. Saladin could not believe his luck. He immediately lifted the siege of Tiberias. The city no longer interested him. The enemy army was walking into his cauldron on its own. All day long, Saladin's light cavalry, like a swarm of wasps, attacked the stretched-out column of Franks. Instead of engaging in direct combat, they exhausted them. By the evening of July 3rd, completely dehydrated, the Crusaders failed to reach water. They were forced to make camp on a dry plateau known as the Horns of Hattin. Ahead, just a few kilometers away, the Sea of Galilee shimmered, but the path to it was already blocked by Saladin's entire army. And at night, hell began. Saladin's soldiers surrounded the camp. They beat drums, blew trumpets, and chanted. They did not let the enemy sleep. They set fire to the dry brush, and acrid smoke enveloped the Crusader camp, burning their eyes and lungs. And, as the chronicles tell us, they demonstratively poured jugs of water onto the sand in plain sight of the Christians dying of thirst. By the morning of July 4th, the Crusader army had ceased to be a military force. It had turned into a mob of men driven mad by thirst. Saladin gave the order to attack. The battle turned out to be short and devolved into a massacre. The infantry, crazed, abandoned the knights and ran toward the lake, where they were simply slaughtered. The knights, the last strength of the kingdom, huddled together on a hill around the red tent of King Guy and their holiest relic, the true cross. Twice they tried to charge, but they fell from their horses from exhaustion. Soon it was all over. The red tent fell. The true cross was captured. King Guy of Lusignan, his brother, the master of the Templars, and Raynald of Châtillon, all were taken prisoner. The army of the Kingdom of Jerusalem ceased to exist. It was destroyed not by swords, but by one brilliant strategic decision of Saladin. He won the war using the sun, thirst, and smoke as his weapons. In the evening after the battle, the captive kings were brought to Saladin's tent. The Sultan, true to the laws of hospitality, offered ice-cold water to King Guy. The king drank and passed the cup to Raynald of Châtillon. Saladin stopped him. "To this man," he said, "I did not offer water." He turned to Raynald, the oath-breaker and the catalyst of the war. He offered him the chance to accept Islam to save his life. Raynald refused. Then Saladin took his sword and personally fulfilled his vow, beheading Raynald of Châtillon. And then he ordered the execution of all captive Templars and Hospitallers. This was an act not so much of mercy, but of justice. The victory at Hattin was not just a victory. The defeat was a death sentence. The kingdom of Jerusalem had no army left. Saladin did not hesitate. His army, like an avalanche, rolled across the Holy Land. Acre, Jaffa, Ascalon, cities surrendered one after another, their garrisons having perished at Hattin. Less than 3 months later, in September 1187, Saladin's army stood before the ultimate prize, the city over which it all began 88 years ago, Jerusalem. The city was teeming with refugees, but practically no soldiers remained. It was defended by Balian of Ibelin, one of the few who had managed to escape the hell of Hattin. Saladin knew the city was doomed, but now he faced not a military choice, but a moral one. 88 years ago, when the Crusaders took this city, they committed a monstrous massacre, killing thousands. Would he take revenge, or would he show mercy that would write his name into history forever? September 1187. Jerusalem is surrounded. The city that had become the meaning of the Jihad, the life goal of Nur ad-Din and now Saladin, was in his grasp. Saladin begins the siege. His engineers lay mines, trebuchets pound the walls. He knows the city is doomed. The Sultan offers Balian of Ibelin, the commander of the defense, the chance to surrender the city without a fight. Balian refuses. Then Saladin swears to take the city by force and avenge the massacre of 1099, when the founding Crusaders slaughtered the Muslim and Jewish population. The siege tightens. The walls begin to crumble. Balian realizes that the end is near. He turns to Saladin again, but with a different proposal, with an ultimatum. He tells Saladin, "If you do not accept an honorable surrender, we, the defenders, will kill our wives and children. Then we will destroy the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and then we will come out beyond the walls and fight to the death. None of us will be taken alive by you, but you will receive only ruins." Saladin finds himself facing a choice. He can have bloody revenge and a destroyed holy city, or he can receive the city intact but show mercy to those who, 88 years ago, showed none. He consults with his advisors and makes a decision that will immortalize his name. This was not merely an act of faith, but a cold political calculation. Saladin realized a massacre in Jerusalem would make him a tyrant in the eyes of both Muslims and Christians. It would provoke a new, even more ferocious crusade. But mercy would transform him from a conqueror into a legitimate ruler. He would show the whole world that he was morally superior to his enemies. On October 2nd, 1187, the city surrenders. Saladin allows the inhabitants to buy their freedom for a laughable price: 10 dinars for a man, 5 for a woman, 1 for a child. Thousands of the poor who could not pay, he lets go for free. His brother Al-Adil pays the ransom for thousands more. While Christian knights and the wealthy departed loaded with gold, Saladin forbade his soldiers to loot. He personally posted guards at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. 88 years ago, rivers of blood flowed through the streets. Now, columns of refugees walked through them, untouched by anyone. Saladin had won not just a military victory, but a moral one. He had taken Jerusalem, but more importantly, he had won the respect of the entire world. The news of the fall of Jerusalem hit Europe like a thunderclap. The Pope, according to legend, died of grief. The entire Christian world was in shock. Hattin and the loss of Jerusalem were not just a defeat, but a humiliation. And Europe answered. A new Third Crusade was immediately declared. This was intended not as an ordinary crusade, but as a crusade of kings. The greatest monarchs of Europe swore to reclaim the cross. The Holy Roman Emperor Frederick Barbarossa, King Philip Augustus of France, and finally, a man who was his equal as a brilliant general, just as ruthless a strategist, and just as much a symbol of chivalry as Saladin himself. His name was Richard Plantagenet, the King of England, Richard I, the Lionheart. For the first time in his life, Saladin, the unifier, the strategist, and the victor, was to face someone who was his peer. This was no longer a student's war. It was a confrontation between two titans, two masters of their craft, which would go down in history as the greatest duel of the era.
The Crusade of Kings started with a disaster. Frederick Barbarossa, the Emperor of Germany, drowned in a river while still en route. The King of France, Philip, upon arriving in the Holy Land, almost immediately quarreled with Richard. But Richard the Lionheart was different. He was, in essence, the Saladin of the West, a brilliant tactician, a fierce warrior, and a ruthless strategist. Their first meeting was indirect at the walls of the city of Acre. The siege had been going on for 2 years. The arrival of Richard and his siege engines decided the outcome. In July 1191, the city fell. And here, Richard revealed his true face. He represented the complete opposite of what Saladin had demonstrated in Jerusalem. Saladin delayed fulfilling the terms of surrender, the payment of the ransom and the return of the true cross. He tried to bargain. Richard did not wait. He ordered 2,700 Muslim prisoners, men, women, and children, to be brought out beyond the city walls and coldly executed in full view of Saladin's army. He was driven not by anger, but by military expediency. The prisoners were a burden to him. Saladin, in response, ordered the execution of all Christian prisoners he captured. The legend of a chivalrous war turned out to be a lie. It was a war of extermination. Then Richard moved south toward Jaffa. Saladin attacked his army at Arsuf. However, Richard, unlike the army at Hattin, proved to be a genius of discipline. He held his formation under a hail of arrows, and when Saladin, believing the Franks were broken, came too close, Richard gave the order. The heavy cavalry struck. Saladin's army was crushed and fled. For the first time in his career, Saladin suffered a crushing defeat in the open field. But Saladin remained a master of strategy, not just tactics. He realized he could not defeat Richard in battle, so he applied Fabian tactics. He began to avoid battles, burn crops, and poison wells. He turned the land into a desert. Twice Richard approached Jerusalem, and twice he stopped. He realized the bitter truth that Saladin had understood back at Hattin. To take a city does not mean to hold it. His army was melting away. The war reached a stalemate. The two greatest commanders of the world could not defeat each other. They were both exhausted.
Richard received news that his brother was seizing the throne in England. Saladin was on the brink of bankruptcy. A personal meeting never took place. All their chivalrous correspondence is a myth. Their communication was conducted through envoys and was filled with sarcasm and threats. In September 1192, they concluded a peace, the Treaty of Jaffa. It was a compromise that satisfied no one. Jerusalem remained with Saladin, but Christian pilgrims were guaranteed free access to the city. The Crusaders retained a narrow coastal strip from Tyre to Jaffa. Richard sailed away, never having prayed at the Holy Sepulchre. And Saladin remained in Damascus, in his capital. He had won. He had held Jerusalem. Saladin achieved victory in the main war of his life. He defended Jerusalem against the combined might of Europe. The truth is paradoxical. The man who owned the richest lands from the Nile to the Euphrates passed away just a few months after his victory. When the treasurers opened the Sultan's personal vault to pay for the funeral, it was empty. They found only 47 silver dirhams and 1 gold dinar. It wasn't even enough for a shroud. Because true power is not what you accumulate, but what you give away. Saladin gave away everything. First, to buy loyalty and unite the empire, then to defend it, and finally to rebuild what was destroyed. And this truth has lived on for 800 years. Saladin's empire collapsed almost instantly the moment his heart stopped. His sons fought over power like jackals, but his name remained an indestructible monument. This was just one perspective on the Great War. Across the sea, in the west, lived a man who became Saladin's nightmare, a man whose bravery bordered on madness. He was the Sultan's complete opposite. He didn't build empires, he ravaged them for glory. His name is Richard the Lionheart, and the story of his crusade, full of betrayal, blood, and incredible courage, is a legend we are obligated to tell. Subscribe so you don't miss the view from the other side of the barricades. Like this video if the paradox of the Sultan's empty treasury amazed you. And write in the comments, who do you think won this duel? The strategist Saladin or the warrior Richard? Thank you. See you next time.